The last thing anyone remembered about Sarah Jenkins was the determined set of her jaw as she pulled out of her driveway, a worn suitcase in the back seat of her reliable, if slightly dusty, Honda Civic. It was a Tuesday, a day draped in the oppressive humidity of a Virginia summer, and the air hung heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass and impending grief. Sarah was on her way to her father's funeral in rural Kentucky, a journey she'd made countless times, a route she knew like the back of her hand. Her father, a stoic but loving man, had succumbed to a sudden heart attack, leaving Sarah, his only child, adrift in a sea of sorrow. She called her Aunt Martha from the road, a brief, tear-choked conversation promising her arrival by nightfall. "Almost there, Aunt Martha," she'd whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. "Just need to clear my head a bit." Those were the last words anyone heard from Sarah Jenkins. Night fell, painting the endless stretch of highway in shades of charcoal and inky black. Aunt Martha waited, a pot of her famous chicken and dumplings simmering on the stove, the aroma a comforting anchor in the rising tide of her worry. She called Sarah's cell phone every hour, the automated voice on the other end repeating its hollow message. "The subscriber you have dialed is not available." Panic, a cold serpent, began to coil in her stomach. By midnight, Martha was frantic, her calls unanswered, her premonitions growing darker with each passing minute. She alerted the local authorities, a small-town sheriff's department already stretched thin. A missing person report was filed, the details sparse. A 32-year-old woman, slender, with fiery red hair, driving a silver 2018 Honda Civic, license plate VJ 7456. Her destination was known, her departure confirmed, but her arrival never materialized. The initial search was broad and frustratingly fruitless. Sheriff Brody, a man whose face was etched with years of rural law enforcement, dispatched deputies to scour the most likely route Sarah might have taken. They checked truck stops, rest areas, motels, and gas stations along the interstates and state highways that connected Virginia to Kentucky. They interviewed anyone who might have seen her: weary truckers, night shift clerks, early morning commuters. No one remembered seeing a silver Honda Civic, let alone a distressed young woman with red hair. The vast American landscape seemed to swallow Sarah whole, leaving behind only a deepening mystery and a family consumed by fear. Her friends in Virginia were equally baffled. Sarah was meticulous, responsible, and fiercely independent. She wouldn't just disappear. She had no enemies, no known financial troubles, no history of erratic behavior. The thought of a voluntary disappearance was quickly dismissed. The media picked up the story, the haunting image of Sarah's smiling face staring out from local news channels and online articles. Social media buzzed with speculation, theories ranging from the plausible to the preposterous. Had she been abducted? Had she gotten into an accident in some remote, unpatrolled stretch of road? The sheer emptiness of the investigation was agonizing. Days bled into weeks, and weeks into 2 long, agonizing months. The initial flurry of activity dwindled to sporadic updates, the hope of finding Sarah alive dimming with each passing day. Aunt Martha, her face now a roadmap of worry, refused to give up. She plastered flyers with Sarah's picture on every lamppost, every bulletin board, every store window in their small Kentucky town. She walked the roads herself, eyes scanning ditches and overgrown fields, a desperate prayer on her lips. The silence was deafening, the absence of any trace of Sarah a torment that gnawed at her soul. The case of Sarah Jenkins, once a burning ember of hope, was slowly fading into the cold ashes of unsolved mysteries. Then 2 months after Sarah vanished, a peculiar phone call came into Sheriff Brody's office, a call that would shatter the fragile peace of a quiet Kentucky afternoon and ignite a new, terrifying chapter in the search for Sarah Jenkins. The call came from a remote, forgotten corner of Pike County, Kentucky, a place where winding dirt roads snaked through dense forests, leading to isolated homesteads and a way of life untouched by the hurried pace of the modern world. The caller, a gruff, elderly man named Jedediah Jed Miller, sounded hesitant, almost apologetic. "Sheriff," he began, his voice raspy with age and perhaps a touch of apprehension. I think I found something you need to see. Been meaning to call, but Been busy. Sheriff Brody, accustomed to the colorful eccentricities of his constituents, listened patiently. Jed owned a sprawling, overgrown property, a collection of dilapidated barns and sheds tucked away deep in the holler, far from prying eyes. He was known as a recluse, a man who preferred the company of his dogs and the quiet solitude of his land to the bustle of town. Jed went on to describe in rambling detail a silver car, partially obscured by a tarp, stashed behind a particularly overgrown shed on his property. He'd been clearing brush, he explained, finally getting around to a corner of his land he'd neglected for years when he'd stumbled upon it. Didn't think much of it at first, Jed muttered. Folks dump all sorts of things out here. But then I saw the license plate glinting in the sun. Virginia plates. And well, then I remembered about that missing girl. A jolt went through Sheriff Brody. Virginia plates. A silver car. His mind immediately went to Sarah Jenkins. He scribbled down Jed's directions, surprisingly precise for a man who claimed to barely leave his property. Within minutes, he was in his cruiser, lights flashing, kicking up a trail of dust as he sped towards Jed Miller's isolated compound. The drive was long and arduous. The paved road quickly gave way to gravel, then to a barely discernible track that twisted and turned through a thick canopy of trees. Brody navigated the treacherous terrain, his gut tightening with a sense of dread. As he pulled up to Jed's property, a ramshackle collection of structures that looked like they'd been there since the Civil War, Jed himself emerged from a rickety porch, a suspicious-looking shotgun cradled in his arms. He lowered it as he recognized the sheriff's vehicle. "Took you long enough," Jed grumbled, though a flicker of relief was visible in his rheumy eyes. He led Brody to the back of the property, through a dense thicket of blackberry bushes and towering weeds. And there it was, partially concealed by a faded blue tarp, pushed up against the rotting wall of a derelict shed, was a silver 2018 Honda Civic. Its once gleaming paint was now dulled by layers of dust and grime, and cobwebs stretched across its windows. Brody's heart hammered against his ribs. He approached cautiously, his gaze sweeping over the vehicle. The front passenger window was shattered, the glass missing, but there were no obvious signs of forced entry on the doors themselves. He peered inside, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. The interior was a mess. Papers scattered on the dashboard, an old coffee cup in the console, and a single well-worn paperback novel lying on the passenger seat. Then he saw it, the Virginia license plate, VJ7456. There was no doubt. It was Sarah Jenkins' car. A wave of grim satisfaction washed over Brody, quickly followed by a profound sense of foreboding. Finding the car was a significant breakthrough, but the circumstances were deeply unsettling. Why was it here, on Jed Miller's property, hidden away? And where was Sarah? The absence of her body, of any trace of her, was a chilling detail. Brody secured the scene, calling for backup, forensics, and a tow truck. The small local police force mobilized, their usual quiet routine shattered by the enormity of the discovery. Forensic technicians arrived, their white suits stark against the earthy backdrop, meticulously documenting every inch of the car and its surroundings. They dusted for fingerprints, collected fiber samples, and painstakingly photographed every detail. The car was a treasure trove of potential evidence, each speck of dust, each stray hair, a silent witness to whatever had transpired. The immediate priority was a thorough search of Jed Miller's entire property. Brody ordered a grid search, deputies fanning out across the expansive acreage, their eyes scanning for anything unusual, any disturbance in the earth, any sign that Sarah might be buried there. The air was thick with tension, the unspoken fear of what they might find hanging heavy in the humid summer air. Jed Miller, initially cooperative, grew increasingly agitated as his property was swarmed by law enforcement. He swore he knew nothing about the car, that it must have been dumped there by someone else, an act of malicious mischief. His alibi, vague and unconvincing, would require further investigation. The discovery of Sarah's car, hidden in such a remote and unlikely location, blew the case wide open, but it also raised more questions than it answered. The mystery of Sarah Jenkins had deepened. transforming from a simple missing person case into something far more sinister. The hunt for Sarah was no longer just a search. It was now a full-blown criminal investigation. The news of Sarah Jenkins' car being found spread like wildfire, reaching beyond the quiet confines of Pike County and igniting a renewed media frenzy. The initial relief that a tangible lead had emerged was quickly overshadowed by the grim realization that the car's condition and location pointed to a far more sinister scenario than a simple disappearance. Recognizing the complexity of the situation and the limitations of his small department, Sheriff Brody made a crucial decision. He requested assistance from the Kentucky State Police, specifically their Major Crimes Unit, and that's how Detective Isabella "Izzy" Garcia, a woman whose reputation preceded her like a carefully cultivated whisper, found herself driving down the same winding, dusty road towards Jed Miller's isolated compound. Detective Garcia was not your typical small-town cop. Her sharp, intelligent eyes missed nothing, and her mind, a finely tuned instrument, could connect disparate pieces of information with uncanny precision. She was known for her meticulous attention to detail, her relentless pursuit of truth, and a quiet, almost unnerving ability to read people. She'd cut her teeth in the bustling, often brutal world of big city homicide before finding her calling in the methodical, deeply human work of cold cases and complex investigations across the state. Her file on the Sarah Jenkins case, though still thin on concrete evidence, was already thick with observations and initial hunches. Arriving at Jed Miller's property, Garcia took it all in. The chaotic disarray of the place, the lingering scent of damp earth and decay, the almost palpable tension in the air. She observed Sheriff Brody, a good man, clearly overwhelmed, and his deputies, diligent but lacking the specialized training for a case of this magnitude. Her first order of business was a thorough review of the initial findings. She walked the perimeter where the car was found, her eyes tracing the faint tire tracks, the disturbed earth, the subtle indentations in the overgrown grass. She knelt, examining a discarded cigarette butt, a seemingly insignificant detail that her mind filed away. She studied the photographs taken by the forensics team, poring over every angle of the Honda Civic. The shattered passenger window immediately caught her attention. Not a clean break, but a jagged internal impact, and the missing glass was a crucial absence. Garcia then turned her focus to the car itself. The interior, though meticulously processed by forensics, held silent clues. The scattered papers, the coffee cup, the paperback novel, all spoke of a sudden, violent disruption. She noticed a faint reddish-brown smear on the driver's side floor mat, almost imperceptible against the dark fabric. A small detail, easily missed, but to Garcia, it screamed for further analysis. She requested a full DNA profile of the stain, alongside comprehensive fingerprint analysis of every surface within the car. The lack of forced entry on the doors, despite the broken window, puzzled her. If the window was broken from the inside, it suggested a struggle, or perhaps something more chilling. Her next step was an extensive interview with Jed Miller. Garcia's interviewing style was a masterclass in gentle persistence. She sat with Jed on his rickety porch, offering him a cup of coffee, listening patiently to his rambling stories about the land, his health, and the damn kids who sometimes trespassed. She let him talk, observing his body language, the way his eyes darted away when certain questions were posed, the subtle tightening of his jaw. Jed maintained his story. He knew nothing about the car. It just appeared. But Garcia pressed him, not aggressively, but with an unwavering focus. Had he heard anything unusual 2 months ago? Seen any strange vehicles? Any visitors he hadn't mentioned? Jed's answers were evasive, his memory conveniently hazy about the days surrounding Sarah's disappearance. Garcia noted his inconsistency, the subtle shifts in his narrative. He claimed to be a recluse, yet his eyes held a glint of cunning, a knowledge he was attempting to conceal. As the day wore on, Garcia began to form a working theory. The car wasn't merely dumped, it was concealed. The broken window from the inside hinted at a struggle within the vehicle, or perhaps a desperate attempt to escape. The secluded location, deep in Jed's private property, suggested either complicity or, at the very least, a lack of curiosity on Jed's part that bordered on suspicious. The case was no longer just about finding Sarah. It was about understanding the precise circumstances of her disappearance, about reconstructing the final moments inside that Honda Civic, and about peeling back the layers of deceit that undoubtedly surrounded Jed Miller. Garcia knew this would be a long, painstaking process, but she felt the faint thrum of a burgeoning lead, a thread that, if pulled carefully, would unravel the entire tragic tapestry of Sarah Jenkins' vanishing act. The real investigation, the one that would uncover the truth, had just begun. Detective Garcia established her command center in a small, unused office at the Pike County Sheriff's Department, transforming it into a hive of activity. Whiteboards filled with timelines, suspect lists, and evidence logs quickly covered the walls. She brought in a small team of her most trusted investigators from the state police, a mix of forensic specialists, data analysts, and seasoned interviewers. The first few days were a whirlwind of meticulous evidence review and re-interviewing every person who had any connection, however remote, to Sarah Jenkins or Jed Miller. The forensic analysis of Sarah's Honda Civic became the cornerstone of the investigation. The reddish-brown smear on the driver's side floor mat was indeed blood, and DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to Sarah Jenkins. This was a critical piece of evidence, definitively placing Sarah inside the car during a violent event. Further examination of the interior revealed signs of a struggle. A broken rearview mirror, a dislodged sun visor, and faint scuff marks on the passenger door panel. The shattered passenger window, as Garcia suspected, showed stress fractures consistent with an impact from inside the vehicle, suggesting Sarah had attempted to break out, or that something or someone had been violently thrown against it. But the most perplexing discovery within the car was a single, peculiar item, a small, intricately carved wooden bird, no bigger than a thumb, tucked away beneath the driver's seat. It wasn't Sarah's. Her Aunt Martha confirmed she'd never seen it before. The wood was dark, aged, and smelled faintly of cedar. It was an anomaly, a silent witness that seemed to whisper a story all its own. Forensics meticulously processed it for fingerprints and DNA, but the results were inconclusive due to the porous nature of the wood. However, a local woodworking expert identified the carving style as unique to a specific, isolated community in the Appalachian Mountains, known for their traditional crafts. This was a new, unexpected lead, suggesting a possible connection to the region. While the forensic team worked on the car, Garcia's data analysts delved into the digital footprint of both Sarah Jenkins and Jed Miller. Sarah's phone records showed her last known call to Aunt Martha, followed by an abrupt cessation of activity. Her GPS data, while limited by her older model phone, showed her on the main highway leading towards Kentucky. Jed Miller's phone, surprisingly, showed very little activity. He rarely called out and received few calls. However, a deep dive into his financial records revealed a series of small, unexplained cash withdrawals in the weeks leading up to Sarah's disappearance, followed by larger, irregular deposits. Nothing substantial enough to flag immediately, but enough to pique Garcia's interest. A man who claimed to be a recluse with limited income suddenly had access to more cash. Garcia also revisited Jed Miller, this time with a more pointed approach. She showed him photographs of the car, the blood stains, the broken window. Jed remained stubbornly evasive, his story unchanged. He claimed to have seen nothing, heard nothing, insisting that the car must have been left on his property by outsiders. But Garcia noticed the subtle tells, a nervous twitch in his left eye, the way he cleared his throat repeatedly, the slight tremor in his hands. She pressed him about the wooden bird, showing him a picture. Jed's reaction was immediate and visceral. He recoiled slightly, a flicker of something akin to fear crossing his face before he quickly composed himself, claiming he'd never seen anything like it. His denial was too vehement, too quick. Recognizing Jed's fear, Garcia shifted tactics. She began to ask about his connections, his family, anyone who might have reason to use his property. She mentioned the distinctive woodworking style of the bird, describing the small, remote community it was likely from. Jed grew increasingly agitated, his answers becoming shorter, his eyes darting towards a faded photograph on his mantelpiece. A picture of a younger man with a striking resemblance to Jed, holding a similar carved bird. The pieces were slowly beginning to fit. The blood in the car, the signs of a struggle, the deliberate concealment of the vehicle, and now the mysterious wooden bird connecting it to a specific, perhaps hidden, community. Jed Miller, a seemingly harmless recluse, was clearly withholding crucial information, and his fear suggested he was either complicit or protecting someone. The silent witnesses, the car and its contents, were starting to scream their story, and Detective Garcia was listening intently, ready to unearth the truth, no matter how dark or deeply buried. The investigation was moving beyond just what happened to who did it and why. Detective Garcia's instincts about Jed Miller were proving uncannily accurate. The photograph on his mantelpiece became a critical focal point. It depicted a younger man with the same angular features and intense gaze as Jed, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. In his hand, he held not just a carved wooden bird, but the carved wooden bird, the very one found in Sarah Jenkins' car. The image was old, faded with time, but unmistakably clear. Garcia showed the photo to Jed, watching his face closely. His stoic facade crumbled. That's, that's my boy, he choked out, his voice thick with a sorrow he had clearly carried for years. My son, Billy. Billy Miller. The name was new to the investigation. Jed, it turned out, had a son, estranged for over a decade, who had been involved in some trouble and had left home under a cloud. Jed, a man fiercely protective of his family, had chosen to keep his son's existence a secret from the local authorities, fearing it would only bring more scrutiny. Billy, according to Jed, had a talent for carving, a skill passed down through generations in their isolated community. The wooden bird was his signature. Garcia pressed Jed for details about Billy. Where was he now? Had he been in contact? Jed, though still hesitant, began to slowly unravel, the weight of his secret finally breaking him. He admitted that Billy had returned to the area intermittently over the past few years, always unannounced, always leaving just as quickly. He rarely stayed at Jed's place, preferring an abandoned cabin deeper in the woods, a place Jed described as off the grid. The last time Jed had seen Billy was about 2.5 months ago, just before Sarah vanished. Billy had stopped by for supplies, looking agitated, talking about needing to get out of Dodge for a while. He'd mentioned something about a job gone bad and needing a vehicle. This new information sent a ripple through the investigation. Billy Miller, the estranged son, a skilled carver whose unique work was found in Sarah Jenkins' car and who was in the area at the time of her disappearance, suddenly became the primary suspect. Garcia immediately dispatched a team to the abandoned cabin Jed described. It was a ruin, even more dilapidated than Jed's own home, hidden deep within a labyrinth of overgrown trails. The cabin was empty, long abandoned, but evidence of recent, albeit brief occupation was present. A few discarded canned food containers, a makeshift cot, and most significantly, a small pile of fresh wood shavings on the floor, smelling faintly of cedar. Among the shavings, they found a small, unfinished wooden bird, identical in style to the one found in Sarah's car. Billy had been here, and recently. The pieces began to click into place with terrifying clarity. Sarah, driving alone on a desolate stretch of road, likely encountered Billy. Perhaps her car broke down, or Billy flagged her down, feigning distress. The blood in the car, the signs of a struggle, suggested a violent altercation. Sarah, desperate to escape, had somehow managed to break the passenger window from the inside. And the wooden bird, Billy's signature, left behind in the struggle, a crucial accidental piece of evidence. The financial transactions on Jed Miller's account also started to make sense. Garcia theorized that Billy, needing money to flee, had coerced his father into withdrawing cash for him, explaining the irregular deposits into Jed's account from an unknown source, possibly the proceeds of whatever job gone bad Billy had been involved in. Jed, out of misguided paternal loyalty and fear, had protected his son, hiding Sarah's car on his property to buy Billy more time. A statewide BOLO, be on the lookout, was issued for Billy Miller, detailing his physical description and his connection to the wooden bird carvings. Garcia knew time was of the essence. Billy was clearly dangerous and he was on the run. She also knew that finding Billy wouldn't be enough. She needed to know what happened to Sarah. The car was found, the suspect identified, but Sarah herself remained missing. The chilling implication was that Billy had done something truly horrific to cover his tracks. The search now shifted from finding a missing person to recovering a body and bringing a killer to justice. The silent witnesses had finally spoken, and their story was one of violence, fear, and a desperate father's misguided protection. The hunt for Billy Miller and the truth about Sarah Jenkins' final moments was now on in earnest. The bolo for Billy Miller quickly yielded results, though not in the way Detective Garcia had anticipated. A tip came in from a gas station attendant in a remote town in West Virginia, over 300 miles from Pike County. The attendant recognized Billy from the news report, noting his distinctive gait and the faint scent of cedar that seemed to cling to him. Billy, it turned out, hadn't fled far, but had been trying to blend into a similar, isolated rural community, relying on his family's loose network of contacts in the Appalachian region. Within hours, a joint task force of Kentucky and West Virginia State Police converged on a dilapidated, off-grid cabin in a densely wooded area. Billy Miller, caught completely off guard, was apprehended without resistance. He was disheveled, gaunt, and carried the haunted look of a man on the run, burdened by a terrible secret. He had a small, worn backpack containing a few changes of clothes, some cash, and a half-finished wooden bird carving. Garcia and her lead interrogator, Detective Mark Jensen, immediately headed to West Virginia. They found Billy in a stark interrogation room, hunched over, his shoulders slumped. He remained silent for hours, his eyes fixed on the tabletop. Garcia, known for her patience, simply sat across from him, allowing the silence to stretch, letting the weight of his capture and the evidence against him press down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Billy looked up, his eyes meeting Garcia's. "She fought," he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible. The confession that followed was a chilling unraveling of Sarah Jenkins' final hours. Billy had been high on a cocktail of cheap stimulants and desperation. He'd lost his job, his meager savings were gone, and he was being hunted by some dangerous individuals over a drug debt. He'd seen Sarah's car, alone on a desolate stretch of road, and saw an opportunity. He'd feigned a breakdown, flagging her down. Sarah, naturally compassionate, had stopped to help. He admitted to pulling a knife on her once she had pulled over, demanding her car and money. Sarah, however, had fought back with unexpected ferocity. She scratched, kicked, and screamed, refusing to surrender. In the struggle, the passenger window had shattered as she tried to kick it out, and the small wooden bird, which he'd been carving moments before, had fallen from his pocket onto the floor. Billy, in a panic, had struck her repeatedly with the butt of his knife, silencing her. He then drove her unconscious body to his father's property, knowing Jed would be too scared and too loyal to report him. He had initially planned to simply take her car and flee, leaving her body in the woods. But fear and the influence of the drugs had warped his judgment. He became convinced that her body would eventually be found, leading back to him. So in a desperate attempt to erase his crime, he had decided to bury her. He led Garcia and Jensen through the grim details, dragging Sarah's body deep into the woods behind his father's property, to a secluded, overgrown area near an old, dried-up creek bed. He had used a shovel he found in Jed's shed to dig a shallow grave. He confessed to burying her along with her purse and phone, fearing they would be traced back to her. He then covered the car with a tarp, hoping it would go unnoticed. The next morning, armed with Billy's precise, if emotionally detached description, Garcia led a search team to the indicated location. The air was thick with humidity, and the forest floor was dense with undergrowth. But after hours of painstaking searching, using ground-penetrating radar and K9 units, they found it. A disturbed patch of earth, subtly different from its surroundings. Digging carefully, reverently, the forensics team uncovered Sarah Jenkins' remains. She was found exactly as Billy had described, her purse and phone buried alongside her. The discovery brought a profound sense of closure, albeit a tragic one, to the 2-month-long search. The medical examiner's preliminary report confirmed Billy's account. Sarah had died from blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with being struck repeatedly. The official cause of death was homicide. The evidence painstakingly gathered from the car, Jed Miller's property, and finally Billy's confession was overwhelming. Jed Miller, initially charged with obstruction of justice, was later offered a plea deal in exchange for his full cooperation against his son. His misguided loyalty had made him an accessory after the fact, but his deep-seated fear and sorrow were evident. He would likely face a significantly reduced sentence. As Billy Miller was formally charged with the murder of Sarah Jenkins, the weight of the investigation, the search, and the eventual discovery began to settle on Garcia. The case was far from over. There would be trials, appeals, and the long, arduous process of justice. But the truth had been uncovered. Sarah Jenkins, who had vanished on her way to bury her father, could finally be laid to rest. Her journey, cut short by a desperate and violent act, had finally found its somber end. The next chapter would be about the justice system and the legacy of a young woman's tragic death. The discovery of Sarah Jenkins' remains and Billy Miller's subsequent confession ripped through the quiet communities of Pike County and beyond. The initial shock gave way to a collective grief, mingled with a grim satisfaction that the truth, however painful, had finally emerged. Detective Garcia, having secured the confession and the body, now shifted her focus to building an unassailable case for prosecution. The meticulous work of forensics, the detailed statements, in Billy's own words, would all be woven into a compelling narrative for the courtroom. The district attorney's office in Pike County took the lead, with Garcia and Jensen working closely with the prosecution team. The evidence was overwhelming. Sarah's blood in her car, the signs of a violent struggle, the distinct wooden bird linking Billy directly to the scene, Jed Miller's testimony about his son's sudden appearance and need for money, and ultimately, Billy's chilling confession detailing the robbery, the struggle, and the burial. Each piece of the puzzle fit perfectly, painting a clear picture of Sarah's final moments. The trial of Billy Miller began 6 months later, a somber affair that drew significant media attention. Sarah's aunt, Martha, her face etched with a grief that time had not diminished, sat in the front row every day, her presence a silent testament to the life stolen. She listened as the prosecution laid out the brutal facts, supported by photographic evidence, forensic reports, and the chilling audio recording of Billy's confession. She flinched as the medical examiner detailed the injuries that led to Sarah's death. Jed Miller, looking frail and consumed by guilt, took the stand as a key witness for the prosecution. His testimony, though difficult for him, corroborated Billy's confession, detailing how his son had appeared agitated and desperate, and how he had, out of a misguided sense of paternal duty and fear, hidden Sarah's car. His voice wavered as he described the torment of knowing what his son had done, and the crushing burden of his secret. His plea deal for obstruction of justice meant he would serve a reduced sentence, a consequence he accepted with a resigned sigh. Billy Miller, represented by a court-appointed public defender, maintained a sullen silence throughout most of the proceedings. His lawyer attempted to argue diminished capacity due to drug use and a troubled past, but the prosecution expertly countered with the premeditation evident in Billy's actions. The luring of Sarah, the calculated burial, and the deliberate concealment of the car. They painted a picture of a desperate man who made a series of conscious, albeit horrific, choices. Detective Garcia's testimony was precise, methodical, and unwavering. She detailed the entire investigation, from the initial missing person report to the discovery of the car, the forensic analysis, and the crucial lead provided by the wooden bird. She presented the evidence with a calm authority, answering every question with clear, concise facts. Her presence in the courtroom was a testament to the relentless pursuit of justice for Sarah. After days of testimony and closing arguments, the jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. The verdict was unanimous: guilty of murder in the first degree. A collective, audible sigh of relief, mingled with quiet tears, swept through the courtroom. Billy Miller showed no emotion as the verdict was read, his face a mask of hardened indifference. The sentencing followed a few weeks later. The judge, in a somber tone, recounted the heinous nature of the crime, the senseless loss of a vibrant young woman, and the profound impact on her family. Billy Miller was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice, in its slow and arduous march, had finally been served. For Detective Garcia, the case of Sarah Jenkins closed, at least in the legal sense. She had brought a killer to justice and helped a grieving family find some semblance of peace. But the faces of victims and their families, the grim details of the crimes she investigated, never truly left her. She knew that every case, every life lost, left an indelible mark. As she packed up her files, a faint scent of cedar seemed to linger in the air, a phantom reminder of the small wooden bird that had ultimately led her to the truth. Sarah Jenkins, who had simply been on her way to mourn her father, had found her own tragic resting place, and in her memory, Detective Garcia would continue her tireless pursuit of justice, ensuring that no silent witness would remain unheard.